Welcome back to Prince William Public Libraries for our sessions from me, William Galaini, on writing. Now, we're entering part 5 of 6, and this one is basically about difficult topics and how to tackle difficult topics as a writer. Whereas we've already talked about cultural differences and religious aspects, things of that level of sensitivity, now we're going into the uglier parts of conflict, things that must be written about. We're going to be talking about difficult topics, including rape, abuse, drug use, individual and personal disability, things of that nature. So consider this a trigger warning. This is going to get difficult, as it should be. Now, we'll start simply with the concept that doesn't feel traumatic, and that is causality. You must remember that a singular event or a singular aspect that brutalizes an individual or individuals is never isolated. So if you are to write about a rape victim, you must write about the systemic issues that they struggle with regarding family. You must deal with shame, guilt, questioning. Also take into account cultural issues that might be within this culture. Take into account religious issues, sexual issues. There is so many other things to measure. So at the center of it could be your trauma, but you must write in considerable detail about the periphery that extends out from the horror. Because in the end, when we're talking about rape or pedophilia or incredibly difficult topics, they don't stay in boxes. They spill over. Alcoholism never remains in the bottle. It all comes bubbling out and devours everything around it. And you absolutely must express this if you are to respect the challenges that we, and likely you, face when traumatized. I apologize for you having to look at me, but I feel that it is vital that you see the individual you're speaking to. When we engage in topics in online forums or through reading books of people's personal issues, we see text, and then we put our own, as the reader, our own tones and characterizations into those words and flavor them through our bias. It's inevitable. But this is where people skills are vital for the writer. You as a writer must engage with individuals who are experts in the fields you're writing about and who have suffered the traumas you wish to write of. You must employ the skill, not just the latent, talent or the latent presence of empathy, but you must employ the skill of active empathy in order to connect with what these individuals have suffered, and also to make sure you understand why you're writing it. Because we'll get to that later, but this is not a matter of the tourism of suffering. You're not here just to have fun as an explorer in a dive bell. Ooh, look at all this trauma. No. You are having to tackle a very difficult and serious topic, and you must respect it and tread lightly, because it will devour you if you are not careful. I also want to make sure you see my face because obviously I'm a white male. I'm essentially the top of the socioeconomic food chain in the United States. I am a white, cis, hetero male. So the first thing that I should ask myself whenever I wish to write about traumatizing topics like racism or emotional violence or things of that nature is I must ask, why do I feel that I am the voice to approach this? Why am I entitled to do so? First off, I am not. Secondly, I am a professional writer, which means I have worked very hard to make sure that I am doing due respect and diligence to all peoples involved. And if I, for a moment, have any doubts that I'm doing that, I cannot produce that work. There's a number of books that I have on topics that I genuinely have meaningful ideas and desires to write and explore. But again, I am not going to go into a dive bell and go check that out for funsies. They will remain unpublished. Many of them will remain unwritten. Because in the end, I am not confident in my ability to present that trauma. I also am not confident in why I wish to do so. Am I just looking to explore this? I'm not sure. Remember what I said earlier in a number of videos back, is that there's no mistakes in writing. It's true, there are no mistakes in writing. But there are mistakes in publishing. And when I realize that I'm writing something that I will never publish, that does not meet my standard of truth, why am I even bother writing it? So please keep that in mind. And again, understand that all this is coming from a very white individual who is comparatively privileged. Okay? I understand that. I want to make sure that you know I understand that. So every single thing I do in this video will be done through that lens, and me understanding that I cannot attain the escape velocity required to escape what I am does not mean I can't produce meaningful work in the topic, because as you're about to see, a number of the writers we're about to look at have not experienced some of the things they've written of, but still, some of their works are considered seminal contributions to the issue. Fault in Our Stars by John Green does a very good job of dealing with the imminent death, especially of the terminally ill, among two youths who become connected throughout this book. Now, while if you go to like Goodreads or other places for discussion forums, you'll find some individuals trying to recreationally cancel John Green in general. This book does it right. John Green made a point of getting to know very directly individuals who are suffering from this ailment, and it was inspired through a relationship he had with someone who was staring down the barrel of cancer. And his relationships here click. They're fulfilling, they're realistic, they're charming. He also does not shove in a happy, fulfilling ending. He instead presents an accurate one and helps us, through the protagonist, cope with the accurate truth of that ending. He did a great job. So I strongly recommend reading Fault in Our Stars. And another common criticism I hear mistakenly, I feel, that the characters just talk like adults, kind of indicate to me that not enough people who read this book spent time around intelligent teenagers. Because some of the sharpest wits and the most perceptive observations come out of the mouths of babes, one might say. So yeah, this John Green definitely does it well. Laurie Halse Anderson's juggernaut classic, Speak, does very well in middle schools and high schools for its approachability and lack of glorification when dealing with the topic of rape. We will look into some books that do it wrong, but it's clear that this author understood the topic, understood the long-term ramifications, understood how it socially impacts individuals, understood the internal navigations a victim of this crime must travel. Wonderful book. Again, common criticisms from people tend to claim that, oh, it's too boring. I'm sorry. But that individual, or those readers who are looking for an exciting book about rape trauma, really have problems. And they are not of my concern. Another common criticism is that the end of this book is a little bit too happy ending. While I wouldn't say that criticism would be invalid, I really wouldn't. I would say that sometimes some of us do wind up having closure. Closure is possible, sooner sometimes than later. These traumatic events and horrors do not need to echo over our entire lifespan. They will always be present, they will always be in the periphery, but they will not be dominating forces. Whereas this character is so traumatized from what happened to her that she literally stops talking. this book is about her confrontation and beginning to heal from that. It is not by any means a full come around recuperation. But yes, Speak is as good as people say it is. It is cognizant. It is conscientious. It's great. And I am trying to pull from more recent works. But like Black Boy is another great masterpiece. But I'm trying to pull from something more of the modern era, and The Hate You Give, especially while Black Lives Matter is still a fresh movement to many, but not all. I feel The Hate You Give does a wonderful job of exploring police brutality and systemic and systematic racism all throughout the United States. This is the kind of book that I would never write, but I desperately am hungry for. While I've read a large number of essays, your library has a lot of resources like JSTOR, etc., but while I have read a large number of essays, and I have friends who have suffered at the hands of this level of racism, when they have told me their stories of how terrified they were in their simple engagement with the police, I still would not have written it because, again, I feel that I would not be entitled to do so, and I would much rather have a better, sharper, more conscientious voice doing it. I'm not here to be a tourist of suffering. So, with that said, as a reader, I feel The Hate You Give is wonderful. Angie Thomas is also a delight to interact with. I've only done so mildly, but wonderful book. Other books I'd recommend would be Leaving Atlanta, and like I said before, Black Boy. Whoo, Black Boy is a punch in the face. Very difficult, challenging book. If you want to see how a narrator can juggle poverty, alcoholism, racism into a coherent narrative that is respectful on the material, it is an excellent read as well. Another book that does a great job targets specifically a number of disabilities and birth defects is Wonder. One of the things it does is, as you recall, beginning of this video, I talked about the web of causality that surrounds trauma or challenges. And this book tells from multiple perspectives within the family of this boy's trials. And it is a wonderfully well-written book that by no means demeans its audience. The complaint it predictably has is that it is a very sugary sweet resolution. And what I have to say to that is I think many of us are so accustomed to horrific, tragic tales without happy endings that we don't think those happy endings are possible for people who suffer. Well, they are. It is a little bit heavy-handed. The book skews towards a younger audience, and the bad people, the antagonists, are a bit too voracious, and the people who are the protagonists are a bit too virtuous. But with those minute elements aside, it does do a very good job of representing just the day in, day out challenges of this child's many medical issues, as well as how the family have now become pulled into the gravity of this thing, and how it does not define these people. It is a constant hovering aspect, but it does not dominate them. Very good book. I recommend it highly. It is a very well-regarded work for a good reason. With the American public becoming more engaged and aware with neurodiversity, we've seen a lot more protagonists or characters retroactively diagnosed with either autism or something that lands in what is commonly known as spectrum. And while the term Asperger's itself is no longer accurate, partly because of its kind of misdiagnosis as well as its Nazi ties, we have now come to find that nearly 1% of America's population falls into the category of being on spectrum. This is a huge population of people. And they've not just merely arrived. People of atypical neuroses have always been here. Always. They're just merely acknowledged and recognized now on a consistent and massive, level. So we're going to be seeing a lot of characters represented that way. We've also seen a lot of books written by individuals. We've discovered that a lot of our famous actors, a lot of our favorite heroes, are indeed atypical neurologically. And a great book that does it justice is The Curious Instinct of the Dog in the Nighttime. Wonderful book. Charming, funny, human, compassionate. I recommend it highly. Also, if you want to read a book written by an individual who is autistic, this is one of my favorites. The Cuckoos Egg. Now, this is written by Cliff Stoll. He's an autistic researcher in California, and during the early days of the internet, he wound up being one of the first people to encounter infiltrators from Europe through their college computer network. And he wound up having to trailblaze this entirely new type of espionage. And this book chronicles all of the steps he took, all the people he dealt with in trying to stop a major security breach to the United States as just a regular researcher, hippie out in California. Great book. It touches a bit on his autism and how that helps him. His coping mechanisms with his neurodiversity winds up aiding him quite a bit. He was the perfect man at just the right time to protect America's borders. Wonderful book. Now, a lot of strong emotions immediately burst forth when we think of the word Lolita because of its hypersexualization of children, to say nothing of Nabokov's infamous book. I've read it. I read it because I wanted to make sure that whatever feelings I had towards the connotation of the term or pedophilia, I at least had the cultural background of this novel. It is a brilliant, magnificent book that is crushing to read. It is far more nuanced than you'd expect. It is respectful of its antagonists, but not respectful of what they do, if that makes sense. There's absolutely no glorification of it either. But it is an excellent, excellent book. It is one that is continuously studied, read, and debated. You will find people who hate its existence. You will find people that hate the book itself but love its existence. And then you'll have, unfortunately, people who are fans of the book for the wrong reasons. Yet, a lot of the people who are actual pedophiles, etc., from the pedophile forums and groups that I have aggregated information from, genuinely hate this book and fear it. It is a blinding light shined on their horror, and it is a hell of a book. It is an incredibly difficult topic, boldly done correctly, and it is worthy of being sort of the end-all be-all of pedophilia. There's more to it than that. I can't even begin to do a synopsis of the nuances presented in both the language and the text itself, but it is a masterpiece of literature for a reason. It earned its place. So that, Lolita, is another example of how you write about a horrific topic, a horrifically difficult topic, and to do that topic justice. And now we're going to do something a little bit more difficult. We've talked about books that have tackled incredibly difficult and horrific topics well, but I'm going to point out some examples, very few, that have failed, either well-intentioned or not, to tackle difficult topics. Actually, I'm going to bring up two books specifically that were huge literary successes, but are truly awful, malicious books, especially when looking at, how they interact with their subject matter. I want to hesitate in condemning the authors, even though one was Me Too'd as a sexual predator and the other is, well, she had an agenda. But not all books are created equal. And these books you may have heard of. So when we look at these two books, I would only encourage you read them as an example of what not to do. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first one is Go Ask Alice. This was written during the phase of the whole satanic panic where terrorizing people, especially suburbanites, was very profitable. You manufacture a horror, and then you sell people the solution to that manufactured horror. Now, this was presented as a journal from someone, a young girl who never really has a name, but they just call her Alice because it's playing off of the very popular song by Jefferson Starship. But this is presented as an anonymous journal of a girl's descent into drug hedonism and destruction. Down the road, it was discovered it was completely manufactured and written by an editor who was very anti-drug, partly because it's obvious. A lot of the things that occur within this book are not realistic at all, including the drug abuse. It's almost like reading erotica written by a 7-year-old. It's embarrassing. But still, this book went on to sell millions and millions of copies and was accepted as a hardcore truth staple. So a lot of pearl-clutching individuals would read it, gasp, worry about the drugs, and donate money to the DARE program, etc. This is garbage. This is a moderate literary crime done in bad faith. And as the book took off and became popular, the woman who wrote it, pretending to merely be the editor, wound up writing sequels and literally kind of took away the curtain and said, no, I wrote it, so give me all the money and give me all the credit. I wrote sequels too. And again, they were just as absurd and ridiculous as Go Ask Alice. So sadly, given that you have so many stronger books about descent into drug madness, such as Requiem for a Dream or other works that are first-person narration, this Go Ask Alice book was merely designed to profit off of the fears of individuals who are ignorant to the world of drug abuse. This is damaging. This is exactly what none of us writers should ever do. The next book was an obvious one for me. When I was teaching in high school and in middle school, this came across a lot of English teachers' lists. And it dealt with, the difficult topics of rape and suicide. It's a high concept presentation where a girl commits suicide, and through her pre-suicide produced tapes and audio logs, she manipulates the people in the town around her to do her bidding, as far as her getting even, or her settling scores, or her trying to change hearts and minds. It initially in structure works almost like a murder mystery where the culprit had already gotten away with it. And that would have been an interesting nuanced approach. But unfortunately, Jay Asher hypersexualizes his victimized, I guess, an antagonist, to where he very much enjoys writing about her body, the sexual situation she comes into, because he's more than a little bit engaged on an interest level that's not healthy. Now, Jay Asher had been exposed during Me Too and canceled a lot of his events, etc. I don't know if he's still working or not. But a number of women have accused him of both grooming and sexual harassment. So it is a book written by necessarily a sexual predator, say what you will about that, but on top of that, the book trivializes suicide into being a narrative mechanic for a high concept story, as well as hypersexualize its child, who is at the center of the crime of this. It's a problem, to say the least. It is clearly written by a person who neither understands rape, nor by a person who understands the tenets and that web we discussed of suicide. All those effects that branch out from the event. And to add further insult to injury, in the back of the book, there is one of those fake interviews where the writer clearly wrote the interview questions as well as the answers to the interview questions. And it's very self-ingratiating. It is embarrassing. Whoever enabled this book to exist, I don't know why. Again, I assert there are no mistakes in writing, but whomever smashed the publish button on this one done goofed. So there's another fine example of what not to do. You've already had great examples with Speak, Black Boy, Lolita, The Hate You Give, Curious Dog, Case of Curious Dog, The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime, sorry. Fault in Our Stars, Cuckoo's Nest, and of course Leaving Atlanta, which I will sing praises of constantly. But keep in mind of that web. Focus on the event, the difficulty, the rape, or the trauma, or the poverty, or the racism, but make sure you keep into account all of the rippling effects, including the perpetrators of these crimes, as well as the victims, as well as the bystanders. You have a lot of material to soak up here. Empathy is your vital tool. And I don't just mean the latent empathy that we all have as humans, but I mean mature, sharpened, honed empathy. You need to be able to move beyond yourself and truly look deep into, as much as you can, the layers of trauma and difficulty that these topics produce. And only then can you start, not end, but start to find the truth behind these things and present them meaningfully and remotely accurately in a narrative. This was a very difficult video for me to do because, again, white guy. So understand your limitations, understand your place in the society that you are writing about. This is why so many individuals try to explore these difficult topics of rape, of racism, of neurodiversity, and the prejudices that surround it through the proxy of fantasy and science fiction. So it would be easier for Disney, instead of writing a rape narrative, they'll just do the movie Maleficent. Instead of doing in Star Trek, just, instead of doing racism, Star Trek would wind up having a character one half white, one half black. So the proxy and the allure of fiction is that these topics can be tackled indirectly because of their daunting nature and because of the challenge for the generator of the narrative. Because otherwise you wind up getting either something trite and heavy-handed like Crash, or another bludgeoning book that I didn't even mention that was garbage like The Help. So it is very difficult. It is a fine line. You can walk into it with the very best of intentions and produce something that does damage to the topic you so desperately and passionately feel towards. So as a writer, please be careful. And this will bring up our last topic before I exit out of this and go and have a drink, because this has not been easy. And I also understand the permanence of the internet, so anything I said here will be held against me for all time. But the other thing is, make sure you have sensitivity readers. So I had a minor character in one of my books that was trans, and so I had 3 trans people read it, 3 individual trans individuals. They were not all from the same background or same region or same generation. I needed their perspective. Did I do this person justice? Did I properly represent them? Do you feel insulted? Do you feel anything? Do you feel nothing? How does this feel? Same thing with all my characters that are not heterosexual. I have people of the closest approximation of that sexual orientation I can have read. And I say it like that because I've written asexual characters. And finding someone who's completely asexual or aromantic is not entirely easy. Sometimes, you might know someone but may not know their orientation in that regard. But you can definitely go onto forums. You can definitely find resources online. Sometimes a place as simple as Tumblr or Twitter, a hashtag, hey, I need sensitivity readers. Make sure you vet your sensitivity reader, because you might get a person, like with the internet, you might get someone completely random and crazy, but make sure you vet your sensitivity readers, get to know them, get to trust them, and have them give you feedback that's meaningful on your work. And remember, this is not about you. This is not a judgment. My first pass at everything is awful. So will yours be. It is about producing the best work you can. Your ego is only attached to your end product. You make no mistakes in writing. You only make them in publishing. Good luck.